And a very good morning to you and welcome to K24 this morning. My name is Jeff Motte. As always, we start off the show by looking at the big stories of the day, of course, courtesy of your dailies. Look at the front pages and then from there, dig a bit deeper to the issue of the day and get some much needed analysis and, of course, nuances and what this really means even as we move forward. If you want to be part of the conversation, we love it when you are. You can get me at I am Jeff Motte or at K24 TV. Now, in an interview yesterday, the president spoke to the issue, particularly, sensitive to Kenyans, of cost. The president stated that the much bandied about cost of the BBI process at 14 billion shillings was not comparable to the money misappropriated to corruption daily. Now, this cost debate has been one that has been heard in several fora, from Raila and Chebukati on the cost of a referendum, the BBI Secretariat and the IEBC on the cost of signature verification. We have seen this script play out severally, but really, what's the cost on Kenyan people? And not only financially, but socially as well. The cost of democracy is our conversation today, but as always, first, we look at the newspaper headlines. Let's start off right there on the front page of the PD, and it's all about that particular story we'll be talking about today. Uhuru, stolen cash being used to fight BBI. President rallies his Mount Kenya support base around Unity Project, says it's the best outcome for the region as he dismisses Ruto and his allies for opposing initiative, promoting the hustler versus dynasties narrative. This story can be found on page 6 of your People Daily this morning. And of course, this is subject, of course, from the interview that was carried out yesterday across several vernacular stations. Of course, the president just laying out his plan as far as BBI is concerned as well, moving forward. And you can find the story in your copy of your People Daily. Let's look at what we have at the top part of the front page. Ruto's latest moves to consolidate Rift Valley. Deputy President William Ruto has lately been courting some of his opponents, the latest being former Bomet Governor Isaac Ruto and West Pokot County Chief John Lanyangapuo. This can be found on page 14, of course, as people try to just read the political landscape and see where they need to be as far as that's concerned. You can find the story in your copy of your People Daily. And also, even as you look at that, matters Nairobi County is still front and center. Anne Kananu inches closer to top seat as LSK rushes to court. This can be found on page 5 of your People Daily, even as you speak about the fact that was it, a constitutional, how this took place, and if it wasn't, how do we move from here, of course. So lots of advice that we'll be getting from the corridors of justice throughout this week, and you can find the details of that particular story in your copy of your People Daily. Top part of your front page in your PD, countdown to inauguration. Washington under watch of thousands of National Guard troops ahead of Biden and Kamala swearing in tomorrow, in a nation still rattled by the January 6th attack on the Capitol. As you've seen the pictures coming from the United States, something that we've never seen before. Right then, of course, we wait to see how the swearing in will take place as far as that's concerned. This story can be found on page 8 and 9 of your People Daily today. Don't forget, you can get yourself a copy of your PD straight to your phone, and it only costs you 10 shillings. The number that you dial is *550 *4#. Once again, it's *550 *4#. It's brought to you by the People Daily and Safaricom. Let's see what other papers have this morning. Front page of the Daily Nation. Uhuru right there, fire at Ruto, as you can see right there, fires at Ruto on that particular issue. Keen to address concerns that he has been laid back and hands off in the succession politics of the vote with Mount Kenya, leaving his deputy to roam free and build sizable support. President Kenyatta asked the region to allow him to focus on his development agenda first. This story can be found on page 4 of your Daily Nation, as he talks about that, of course, severally in this particular interview. He also reiterated the fact that they shouldn't confuse a lion that has been rained on to be a cat. You can find that on page 4 of your Daily Nation. And as you look at that, of course, assessment faces hitches, this being the third week of children back in school. Logistical challenges delayed the start of the national assessment of primary school learners yesterday, with head teachers complaining about the cost of downloading and printing tests. This story can be found on page 12 of your Daily Nation, with all the details therein can be found as well. On the extreme right part of your Daily Nation, Kalonzo and DP in bare-knuckle war of words. Wiper Democratic Movement leader Kalonzo Musyoka and DP William Ruto are locked in an all-out political war after the former went for the DP's jugular, challenging him to submit a transparent lifestyle audit. But in a rejoinder, the DP accused Mr. Musyoka of staging the attack to save his waning political influence. That can be found on page 5 of your Daily Nation this morning. On the front page of the Standard now, let's scroll up on that. Tough call for Uhuru. With a restive Mount Kenya backyard, President turns to his vernacular radio stations to trash quote-unquote hustler narrative, make impassioned plea for support for BBI and to declare that he is yet to pick his successor. You can see that story on page 2. They also break down some of the issues that were spoken about in this particular interview. The hustle narrative being something that he addressed, building bridges, and how he thinks it should move forward as far as that's concerned. And the Nairobi County leadership, Major General Badi is an example of what good leadership can do for the city. You can find this particular story in your copy of your Standard therein with all the details right there. Quickly, we look at the front page of the Star now. DP land grab appetite is unrivaled, says Kalonzo. Ruto insists Kalonzo grabbed Yatta land, claims ex-VP is scared of losing Machakos by-election. This story can be found in your copy of your Star with all the details therein. And quickly, and of course finally, we look at the front page of the Business Daily, all about matters economics. Treasury says they're ahead of the domestic debt target on COVID. As you can see right there, a slowdown in business activity has affected revenue collection, leaving the state with gaps in spending. You can find that story and more, of course, in your copy of your Business Daily this morning, as you get all of that right there. But right now, front and center, as we discuss it, is all about where we go in terms of the cost of democracy. It's a story that we'll be having right here. And we carried this story yesterday, and that's exactly where we start. Now, President Uhuru Kenyatta has dismissed BBI critics over the cost of the referendum, saying its benefits far outweigh the costs. The head of state, who was addressing Mount Kenya residents on Kikuyu vernacular stations yesterday morning, including Mediamax own Kameme Radio, further rubbished claims that the BBI was unpopular in Mount Kenya region, saying a section of politicians in the region were peddling lies about the initiative, which he says seeks to offer solutions to perennial problems facing the country. And this is a story that Giverson Minor reported. Take a look.
President Uhuru Kenyatta on Monday, while addressing Mount Kenya residents on Kikuyu vernacular stations, including Mediamax on Kameme FM, dismissed claims that the Building Bridges initiative was unpopular in central Kenya, blaming a section of politicians in the region of peddling lies about the initiative, which he says ought to offer solutions to recurrent problems facing the country, especially post-poll chaos.
Rumai, Negu.
Continue abusing me. I'm the president until I finish my term. Abuse is nothing to me, but try bringing chaos and see come true what I said in Kakamega to confuse a rained-on lion for a cat.
The head of state told of anti-BBI crusaders who claimed that the cost of BBI referendum was too high, saying the benefits far outweigh the costs.
I don't know why people got the cost of 14 billion shillings, but even so, these people are on a daily basis stealing that 2 billion shillings you hear people talking about. These people are deceitful.
The president slammed BBI critiques for stirring up incitement among Kenyans through the dynasty versus hustler narrative, which he warned as deeply divisive and only aids in entrenching hostilities and sparking social status divisions.
If someone wants to use the logic that because my father was president and now I'm president, then our family is a dynasty, does that mean that if your father was a doctor, then you shouldn't be a doctor?
Kenyatta urged Mount Kenya residents to support the BBI initiative, saying it will ensure equitable distribution of resources as well as unite the country, which has been rocked by cyclical waves of post-election tension and chaos every 5 years.
You're being fooled by being told this thing, BBI, is for Raila. If we allocate more money to Kiambu or Kirinyaga counties, are they neighbors of Raila? Let us not politicize BBI.
Responding to critiques, President Kenyatta said those opposed to constitutional changes through the BBI have resorted to dirty politics in faint hope that he would pick a fight with them to further their ill motive. Giverson Minor, K24, Nairobi.
Thanks for that report, Giverson Minor, and that really makes the mainstay of our conversation today. It's all about the cost, not only the financial cost, but the cost to the social fabric as well. How do you move forward as people speak about trying to, make some business work, have some development take place before the elections? Is that the cost we have to pay? Have an election year start a year in advance? That's the conversation we're having right here in studio. Happy New Year, Mr. Edward Wanyonyi. Welcome to the show.
Happy New Year, Jeff.
We're still in order. When does the year stop being new?
Even the Ethiopian have not celebrated.
Oh, really? So it depends on the calendar.
Yes, it depends on your calendar.
Thank you so much for making time and being on the show. Edward Wanyonyi, a media researcher and trainer as well. Thanks for making time. Asante sana.
Pleasure.
Joining the conversation via Skype, we have Joy Mdivo. She's the Executive Director at the East Africa Center for Law and Justice. Morning, Joy. We'll sort out that. Is there an audio issue on your side? Probably need to unmute your microphone right there. We'll get them in on this particular conversation. Also joined by Mark Bichachi, who's our communication strategist on this. I could see you following that particular story that we were playing, Edward, and from where you stand and what the president said, because really he spoke about a raft of issues. But the one thing that jumped out and that was, topic for conversation for the better part of yesterday, coming in today, is when he spoke about the fact that, yes, even if it costs 14 billion shillings, there are those people, didn't name names, who are stealing 2 billion shillings daily. What is the take on that?
I mean, just the audacity of that confession was for me troubling, in terms of all these institutions you've put in place. Asset recovery, we have unclaimed assets, we have the DCI, we have all this. And yet 2 billion shillings, it's, within 24 hours, it's out of the economy. I think for me that's one of the biggest admissions that the ship is sinking, not even bleeding, the ship is sinking literally. And I would have expected that, with such a pronouncement, all the agencies that are supposed to be able to deal and track will be able to move into place. But you realize that we have a more or less like a captured state. Mm-hmm. And with a captured state, it means like even the powers that he has in his office are more or less, held captive, and he can't move as much as possible. Which for me now brings to the issue in terms of whether solutions to our society, as we envisaged in the 2010 Constitution in terms of bringing institutions, is actually a solution, or it's actually the whole issue of how the structure of the presidency is always organized. Because if the president can admit that, we are losing this amount of money, yet we are not talking about any convictions in court, we're not talking about people who are serving time in prison, then there's a problem there. Right. A very, very big problem. And it's not institutional. It is partly culture that has been left, and it's aided and abetted. And at the same time, the fact that always towards any kind of election-related activity, whether it's a referenda or it's a general election, so much money has to be dispensed, which means not even about the cost of the democracy, but the legitimacy of that democracy is in question.
And it's interesting because even as you say that, let's not forget the one moment when President Kenyatta asked, what do you want me to do? Because, I mean, there's a constitution. As you said, there are institutions that should be following up on this. He has resourced them. He has given them the power they need to do their work. What else can he do?
Yes, but also we have to appreciate the fact that the level of our institutions and the appointments thereof are so much skewed. I mean, I think it was activist Tokio Mtata who went to court and said that even for parastatal levels, we need to have interviews and competitive appointments. Still to date, you'll see ministers appointing people in parastatals, by kin. You remember the case whereby someone who was deceased was appointed, I think, by, in one of the parastatals in the Ministry of Information and ICT. Later on, it was changed and the wife was appointed. There is zero approach to meritocracy, Bodies which are supposed to be sensitive and deliver on key mandates, you'll find they'll have put there, former politicians who failed perhaps, just to redeem them because they supported the party, not out of merit. We are not saying that people who have retired have failed in, elective positions should not be given positions. But if we are going to recycle and put them there without any form of merit, then they will kill those institutions. Those institutions will not have the teeth, the canine capacity to be able to deal with this kind of issues because, one, they are administrating over people who are most likely their former friends, colleagues, so they will not be able to bring in the kind of independence and objectivity to ensure that those institutions work as expected.
I like that term you've used right there. I think I'll use it later. Canine capacity. Let's talk about the canine capacity of the institutions that should be dealing with this. We have the DCI, we have the EACC, we have the DPP's office as well. And what we had seen for a while when they started off, there was a good camaraderie between the three heads of those offices. There was a time when we'd have, prominent, officials being hauled into, police vehicles, taken in for what has now been called Kamata Fridays. And some people thought, okay, fine, we're ready to bring down the big fish, as it were. And then it's deteriorated into a finger-pointing blame game. You're not giving us, adequate evidence. You're taking too long with the cases in court. No, it's a judiciary. Where do you think the buck stops in terms of just getting these people, bringing them to book and recovering these assets?
There is one part which I think Joy, as legal counsel, can speak to in terms of how those institutions, their legal mandates are supposed to work and interact. Where I'm interested in is the social legal elements, the cultural elements of law in practice. And those require that we look at processes versus networks and the social capital that people bring when they are actually taken into court. And the fact that in Kenya we've cultivated a culture that says once taken into court, we know the number of adjournments which will come. We know how we can be able to ensure that evidence is not aptly provided. We know how we can ensure that people who are keen on those cases are either transferred. And so people know that they can be able to escape from any form of conviction by virtue of delay. The process is delayed. So when justice is delayed, is it really going to be justice at the end of the day? So all these institutions crafted well in paper, but in terms of practice, of adherence to the law and what is expected, it is not working. And it means, for me, the whole issue of culture. Culture that we have taken in terms of, one of the things which the Chief Justice said, we disobey court orders right from the top of government. Right. So even at the local level, someone will tell you, why should I be able to adhere to this law? The second thing is the whole issue of corruption-related offenses are supported by close people, family. You'll find relatives who are opening proxy companies for others. You'll find relatives who are actually taking bail for others. You'll find relatives who are actually using their bank accounts to hide property and wealth for their friends. So you will realize that at family level, the system is broken. And no one is calling any other person out for these issues. Right. And so when the president comes, he realizes the beast is actually a behemoth in this society. And it's a challenge.
And when the president himself speaks of asking these particular agencies to bring down the big fish, what do you think of that? Because he said it severally when he was addressing the nation and asked them that the Kenyans also want to see these big fish, so to speak, brought to book and these assets recovered.
Well, there's one thing about presidential statements. Presidential statements are supposed to be backed up by action, executive action. There are teams which are supposed to work behind the scenes in terms of presidential delivery to ensure that the executive is not frustrated at any moment. Whether these teams and within these institutions or these people who have been charged with this mandate have actually abdicated their role or they have been caught up in the bureaucracy and the processes and forgetting about the bigger picture is another issue. However, the question is, there are teams which, like for example in the Public Service Commission, and you can be able to find out in terms of line management and who is supposed to handle which file and why they are not able to prosecute these cases. It is there. It's a culture issue whereby, for so many times, cases will be dragged and delayed deliberately because people have known the trick that whatever you're looting with a view of ensuring that you subvert justice. Not just you profiteer alone. So that by the time the police are coming, you've already put aside a certain amount that will be able to keep them at bay. Right. And that's the problem. It's an institutional leakage that goes in terms of the welfare of the police officers who are at the DCI. It is what happens in terms of our court registries. It is what happens in terms of the lawyers who are brought in to actually defend and ensure that, these processes are effective. So it's a breakdown, total breakdown at the institutional level in the country.
Right. And because even as you say that, there's a big question of the elephant in the room, BBI, that he was defending yesterday to the Mount Kenya region. And therein, there's also a pillar on corruption and how we need to deal with this. You've read the document. Do you think it's fit for purpose? Does it move us in the right direction? They've spoken about getting the intelligence service involved in the fight against corruption. Is that what we're missing in terms of evidence being collected to make robust cases in court?
There's a challenge with thinking about certain institutions being superior to others when they are actually getting their substance or civilians into those institutions. The politicians come from this society. Even those intelligence officers will come from this very, very rotten society, if we are to be true. I mean, by the time a policeman is involved in crime, you know, where did they come from? They came from the same society. We are speaking about MPs who are abdicating their role. They come from this society. MCAs who are fighting and not actually doing what they're supposed to, they're coming from this society. So if we cannot be able to look at the production base and the way it is corrupt, then even at the end of the day, those institutions, if they're not held accountable, they will still produce after their own kind, literally. So
how do we do that?
Pardon?
How do we do that? Because at the end of the day, it's a societal problem, as you've put it.
It's a societal problem, and we need to start, for me, the whole issue starts with us changing our mindset at a family level, at a personal level, at your own private space. If we don't do that, even the sanctions that those institutions are bringing, we will always create ways to avoid them.
Right.
So instead of dealing with ways of actually supporting and ensuring that the practice is better and the laws are followed, we will always be creative in terms of how do we break the law.
Right.
People are using now anticipatory bail, you know, because they anticipate they will commit crimes, they are getting anticipatory bail in time. We are becoming more adept at breaking the law and getting away with it with impunity, as opposed to actually adhering to it.
Right.
Then we come and blame the president. We come and start. And Kenyans are very powerful in terms of the whole issue of blame game. But we know where we are bleeding. It's an institutional and a personal problem.
And it's interesting you say that, because even as you look at what we are having right now on the front pages of our dailies, most of them, right now, of course, it's all about Uhuru and his address to the Mount Kenya region yesterday.
Yes.
But also, he addressed the issue of this hustler versus dynasties narrative right there. What's your take on that? Because it seems like the president and the former PM are at pains to try and convince people that they are not part of it. There's no such thing as a dynasty or a hustler family. But even as we speak about that, there's a glaring issue of inequality, and that's how this whole hustler dynasty narrative has come about.
Well, there are dynamics to do with the economic composition of that message of BBI. One part of it is that there's the elite and the colonial conversation in terms of home guards benefited from this whole establishment of what we call Kenya, if we were to look at it as an enterprise. And the fact that development has always been skewed against the majority. Well, even in 2050 or 2070, after BBI has come and gone, there will always be poor people. The question is, are we empowering our society to a level whereby poverty is no longer a chalice for using divisive politics? And whether Uhuru comes and leaves the office and another president comes, even if the current team that is opposed to the BBI comes into power, they finish their 10 terms, the next team will still deal with poverty issues. Why? Because it's a structural issue. And they intentionally and deliberately ensure that a certain level of society always is out of the benefit cake. What we need to think about is not even about the hustler narrative. It's so much to do with, to the extent that the politics and the people you're voting for, or you will vote against, will actually ensure that you remain impoverished. I'm just from Western last week, and the level of, you can actually gradually see the level of poverty as it's going on, yet you have MPs who have been there from almost 1992. And still the same issue. You go to Turkana, the same problem. You go to areas of Masai Land, Kajiado, you will see the same problem. It's a national issue. Right. It has got nothing to do with someone who wants to get in power in 10 years and leave. The question is, this person wants to get in power for 10 years, he cannot be accountable for what he's been doing in the past.
It's interesting because even when you talk about the economic implications of what the BBI promises, you also brought in the issue of those who benefited from, being colonial home guards and all of this, and the larger conversation of historical injustice. Do you feel that's a conversation the country is ready to have honestly and get to the bottom of that, or do you need to move along and see what you can do from now moving forward?
We need to face the reality, and we need to have very hard conversations in this country. And the first part of it for me is, we are very good in voting out people. We are bad in voting in the people. because who is coming into this space of election? Right now, you go to across the country, people are now starting to line up, in terms of the new crop of MCAs and MPs everywhere. And everyone is trying to pull a narrative of, I will do better. But if you ask them that what they have done in their private space, even before being elected, you'll find that there's a zero record. So what happens is that we are using the whole election process for ensuring that we just move a step further and ensure that the margin of poverty is still wider. We are not necessarily dealing with that historical injustice. The moment we will come to deal with that historical injustice, it will mean that we'll need to reconfigure even, like, for example, parliament, and the powers that parliamentarians have given themselves, the perks that they are having, we will need to consider things like what this SRC is dealing with, salaries, and people thinking that if I get into elective positions or appointive positions in cabinet, I'm going to have all these, per diems and salaries and allowances, And so the whole idea of largesse and impunity is at the highest level of the society. It's a sad reality. Because we are not going to serve people when all the time we are thinking about how much you're going to be able to account for our per diems and salaries.
If you say that, do you think then, probably even as we get into our first break on the show, we need to have less lucrative seats in terms of parliament? It shouldn't be as lucrative to be an MP or a senator, and probably from there we'll have people whose heart is actually in the right place.
Just ensure that at treasury level, a lot of the benefits are actually going towards development expenditure. The moment you make a lot of the money going to development expenditure, automatically you make that seat less lucrative. And the moment you make it less lucrative, perhaps people who have already done and they are consciously, genuinely interested in elective positions of lawmaking, representation and oversight, they will get into those positions. But our development budget is so skewed because these other perks and benefits and everything, in as much as these people have some level of responsibility, I think they are not looking at the bigger picture. And so you find Treasury caught in a time of COVID like this, you expect that we should have made radical decisions as a country in terms of our development expenditure, but nothing is happening to that level. Still people are enjoying the perks there. Court the other day just said that MPs had been given some form of an illegal allowance. They need to take it back. We have not followed up to see if actually there are deductions which are being made by the Parliamentary Service Commission.
Okay, that brings us to our first break on the show. Of course, even after the break, we'll see if we can get Mark Bichachi and Joy Mdivo back on the show via video link. Of course, it's all about the cost of democracy, not only the financial cost, which caused quite a conversation yesterday from President Uhuru's address, but also socially, what does this mean for us moving forward in terms of even cohesion as a people? This is K24 This Morning, and we're back after a short break. Oh, and then we are breaking at 7:45.
7:45. It's 8:45.
Sorry, 8:45.
Not you particularly, Zoom generally. So I've called Mark, so kama tatusikia from phone. Joy number yake iko sijui.
It's the one she's using on.
Okay. So send her the link here to me. Also try calling her.
Okay. Umenitumia ingine. Umenitumia hiyo link wapi?
WhatsApp.
Haujatuma? Hakuna message nimepata. Who's that? Okay.
Never fade to it, there's no pretending.
Abu, tunaanza hiyo kitu 45. Okay, so utaniwekea hiyo script. Okay. Daddy Mark, can you hear us now? More importantly, can we hear you?
Wait, Jeff Mote,
Yes, sir.
can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
When you hire me in your IT department,
Will you be able to taste your sound?
I can do wonders. I am a whiz at these things.
I shall forward that to senior management. Now, when you come back after the break, we'll have like 15 minutes because we are breaking at 45. So it'll be chop.
Aye, sir, but you've allowed the gentleman in studio to run away with murder.
Welcome back to the second half of our newspaper review. This is K24 This Morning. My name is Jeff Mote. In studio, joined by Edward Wanyonyi, and also joining the conversation via video link, we have Mark Bichachi and Joy Mdivo. If you can hear me, guys, morning, Mark, morning, Joy.
Morning, Jeff.
Joy, can you hear me? Okay, fantastic stuff. Let me start with Mark on this one, because even as we got into the break, Mark, you said that Edward was, running away with murder on this one, and he was calling it as he sees it, because from where we stand, Mark, we have a president who says that even if the referendum cost was 14 billion shillings, from his government, they're losing 2 billion shillings every day, and it's been stolen by those people. Didn't name names, but it's a worrying, admission coming from the president of the country.
Jeff, let me put the statements of the president in perspective. Number one, let us count how much the EACC, the DPP, have said is lost every year to corruption. We know it is a third of our budget. A third of our budget is 1 trillion. We've got 365 days in a year. If you do 365 times 2 billion, what do you end up with? And this of course was the president using hyperbole to communicate a message. But I want to situate it and put it all in perspective. Number one, let us count how much money is lost or was lost. Let's talk actual figures between 2012 and 2013, and 2014 actually, due to political unrest in this country. Now, depending on who you ask, it is about 1 trillion shillings was lost in economic activity. If you look at the same figures between 2016, 2017, and early 2018 before the handshake, you find similar figures. So I wonder to myself that does it make sense to spend 2 billion or 12 billion, because now we're just imagining figures at this rate, and ensure that we save trillions as an economy? That's really the question the president was asking. And I keep asking myself the same question. Do we want to continue having cycles where my office, every election, if last time we had an election, the whole of August, then going into September and October, waiting for the second election, my office was never open. My staff had to work from home. So these are realities that we face every time. But as typical Kenyans with goldfish memory, we want to pretend we cannot remember these things. But the issue that I was saying, that my friend was getting away with murder, is this. That number one, it is not the role of an MP to make sure that people are out of poverty. He's a legislator. His work is to legislate. We have the advantage in this country where he's given some money for CDF to take people to school and to build schools. That's the sum total of what CDF does. In fact, when an MP comes to your district, to your constituency, and he says he built a road, it is strictly not true. There are only two instruments of government that can build roads. That is the county government and the national government. So if we want to talk about poverty eradication, let us talk about it correctly. How is poverty eradicated in countries such as our own? Number one, there must be a fast-growing GDP. Look at Brazil, look at India. They've gotten that right. But there is still the issue of the wealth gap. Now, this is the issue that Kenya contends with. Now, how do you deal with the issue of a wealth gap? I will take you to Bangladesh, and I will remind you of Grameen Bank. What did they do to lift millions of women out of poverty? It is called cooperatives, putting people together so that they can work towards a common goal and common objective. Has that worked in Kenya? Yes. There is no other method of lifting people out of poverty other than offering them education, which the government of Kenya, since the Kibaki days, has offered free primary and now secondary education. It is healthcare. We have free maternity in public hospitals. It is healthcare. We are working on universal healthcare. It is healthcare in terms of improving the services that the population receives. Thirdly, it is to create policies that actually enable small businesses to grow. And how do you do that? You give them tax breaks. You increase the ease of doing business. Has that happened? My goodness, when I registered my company almost 10 years ago, it took me 3 months to get my certificate. Today, you can get on eCitizen and do so. BBI has offered a tax break to our youth. So let us not just discuss things as though there is no template, there is no other format that other countries have used by which to develop. This idea that an MP is somehow supposed to lift you from poverty is a misreading of the Constitution and an abuse of logic.
Mark, I'll have Edward respond to what you've just said, but also I want to ask you, when you say that the president was speaking with hyperbole in terms of 2 billion shillings a day being lost to government coffers, you're a communication strategist. You know the weight of a president's words when it comes to such figures, and he definitely knows how much because he gets this information on a daily basis. Do you think, even from this particular point of view, it was hyperbole? Because when he was speaking about it, he could have said a lot of money. When he says 2 billion shillings daily, this is a president who knows what he's talking about.
Listen, okay, let's do basic mathematics, okay? If you say 2 billion, multiply it by 10, you get to 20 billion. Multiply it by 100, you get to 200 billion. Times 3, that is 600 billion, okay? Add another 65, so he's talking about 700 billion lost in this economy. Now, let us look at the numbers. I said that the EACC, by its own admission, says that we lose a third of our budget, which is 1 trillion shillings, okay? So do we lose about 2 billion shillings in this country every day? Yes. But the hyperbole I'm talking about is, of course, it's not, there's no one going to the central bank taking out 2 billion every day. What the president means, and this is the hyperbole, is the holes, the leakages within our system, be it in a parastatal, be it in county governments, be it in different institutions, leads to a loss of 2 billion shillings per day on average. It does not mean that there is someone literally going to steal 2 billion. But on average, is he correct? Yes, he is correct. And then let me put it in perspective. Why was he talking about it together with the BBI? Because the BBI has stronger rules against the fight against corruption. And then number two, and this is what the part that we keep jumping, he said that we shall freeze those assets soon, which means something is being done. And if you go to asset recovery, every day there are people who are losing lands, who are losing properties, who are losing things that they have ill-gotten. One of those people, by the way, is Raila Odinga's brother, Oburu Odinga, who lost some land that he had fraudulently gotten. So the war against corruption, again, is a slow process, one by dint of how a judicial process goes. But also, let us remember that the United States of America dealt with corruption starting in 1928 with Al Capone, and all the way to 1989 with the Teflon Don. So the process of fighting corruption is a process, and denying that it is a process is a fool's errand.
Edward, I'll come to you on this one. Most your rejoinder from Mark's statement in terms of what you referenced in terms of development and closing this wealth gap.
I think Mark is spot on in terms of, I mean, yes, we have templates from other countries which have developed. I mean, we know what works. It's not that we don't know, we know what works. In fact, there's a joke which is always said that in Rwanda, they will come to Kenya and take the policy and cut the policy-making process. Take the policy, just go there to implement.
Right.
Our challenge is at the implementation stage. And that's why for me, I was on the opinion that we have to think from the cultural perspective, not just from the legal and the institutional and policy perspective. The culture that we have cultivated in a country in terms of issues to do with poverty, in terms of issues to do with development, in terms of issues to do with the pace of development. If you look at the pace of development in certain spaces where you have already electricity, you have already roads, you have already public utility in this country, because of certain levels of, historical issues vis-a-vis others, you will definitely see that these other spaces, even if we had put in the equalization fund and all these other support mechanisms, they will still take long for them to leap into the main economy, and be able to increase the power that they have, their earning power. And so we have to think beyond just the BBI instruments and the political narrative around it in terms of it being a savior, but also to look at the nuts and bolts that are a reality in our country. Mm-hmm. And that means that there are spaces where they will need more activity and more accountability from those leaders.
Right. And it's interesting because even as you say that, Mark, we are coming from a point of view as we wait for this cure that is the BBI. Let's talk about what you spoke about in terms of giving businesses incentives to actually get legs even as they start. In the here and now, it's a trouble that current businesses are facing in terms of the tax regime and doing all of this. Why can't we start with implementing those now? Why do we have to wait until then?
One of the things about implementing a new tax regime, and Donald Trump showed us this in the United States of America, is number one, it takes a process. It takes a legislative process, because you cannot unilaterally decide to change the tax regime, but also it requires a broader economic infrastructure to support the changes that you're making. So let me give an example. Last year, we reduced tax VAT by 2% to 14%. What was the net result of that? The net result of that is the economic crunch we are having this year. And that economic crunch is biting. Now, the same Kenyans who are complaining, for example, last year, that the government was doing nothing to shield us from the pandemic, today are complaining that the taxes have gone back to normal. So you need to understand that all of these things also happen within a political environment. And you need the goodwill of the people and the understanding of the people to implement these issues. Because if, for example, today we say that the 14% VAT was here to stay, then Kenyans should not then complain that we don't have enough money to raise the revenues that we expected to raise, because that's just how mathematics works. So in terms of what is happening now, and I gave you examples. Number one, it may seem like a small thing, like today we have eCitizen that allows you to get your passport, allows you to get your birth certificate, allows you to get your business registration easily. We may think it's a small thing, but it's a big deal. Even the fact that today you can register a company as an individual instead of having at least a partner on your company. All these are steps towards the right direction. What else has been done in the present here and now? We have a trade deal with the United Kingdom, a trade deal that allows us, post-Brexit, to ensure we keep trading with the United Kingdom. Again, what has the government done? We have the Africa Free Trade Agreement, which Kenya championed, which has been delivered this January. Now, if you didn't know that Africa is a $3 trillion economy, meaning whether you make honey or you make furniture or you're a cobbler, today you can take your trade anywhere in Africa and expand your horizons. These are real and present opportunities that exist today. But the problem that we have is we will expend so much energy discussing wheelbarrows, discussing 2022, discussing Tangatanga, Kieleweke, and such nonsensical things when we have practical things that we can tell Kenyans that, listen, you don't have to sell your goats in Kenya anymore. You can cross the border, go to the Central African Republic, and be a goat mogul there. Those are the conversations that we need to have as this country, and those are present things that are happening as we speak, and that's what government is supposed to do, to create an enabling environment for Kenyans to do business. The handouts do not work. If handouts work, then how many billionaires or even millionaires, thousandaires, has Sonko made with his Sonko rescue team all this time? You cannot rescue people from poverty using handouts.
Well, I think at that particular point in time, we'll have to stop that handout conversation right there. Mark Bichachi, thank you so much for, making time to be on the show. I'll be to the challenges via video link. Asante sana for your contribution right there. Edward Onyoni, asante sana for your time as well, of course, on the show. Thank you so much for that. But at this point, we need to shift gears slightly. And like we told you, the series we are starting that's running up until the end of January, and it is the K24 Crystal Ball. Now, the year 2020 dealt the world an unprecedented blow with the COVID-19 pandemic. However, as we get into 2021, do things get better? Do economies grow? Do we embrace new technologies for the better? Does the COVID vaccine bring us back from the brink? Now, throughout the month of January, we seek answers to those questions by getting forecasts and predictions from various experts. We kick off the series with Professor Peter Kagwanja of the Africa Policy Institute. I spoke to Professor Kagwanja about Kenya's task as a UN Security Council member, continental trade through the Free Continental Trade Agreement, and the ghost of the ICC that is seemingly back to haunt the country. This and more in the K24 Crystal Ball. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you.
Is it too late in the year to say Happy New Year? Or
no,
we're still in order?
The year is too young. 10 days into it, or 11.
Okay.
It's still very young.
Fantastic stuff. Thank you so much, for making time and being part of what we are calling the Crystal Ball. So very quickly, we just want you to look into your crystal ball as you look into matters international affairs, so that hopefully in 12 months' time, we'll circle back and look at some of the analysis and predictions you'll make right here and see what came to be, what didn't, what hadn't we seen might happen between now and December. And for you, we're speaking to matters international affairs. Of course, right now, a couple of days back, Kenya finally gets into the United Nations Security Council. We saw Ambassador Kimani put the flag right there. What's your expectation this year for us in that particular seat?
I think you'll be championing African interests. And African interest focuses on areas of conflict, what we call flashpoints. There are certain gains we've made in a number of ways. Congo will be on the agenda. We're going to have Sudan on the agenda. South Sudan is on the agenda. These are areas where the United Nations have peacekeepers and where stability is needed. Now we're going also to get major challenge from Somalia. Possibly, if Somalia elects an alternative leader to Mohamed Abdullahi Farmajo, then Kenya is going to have it very easy, particularly if you get a leader who can cooperate. Currently, that's not the situation, and therefore the election that is due to take place between now and early February, in about 30 days or so, is going to be determinant of Kenya's success in intervening in Somalia. Obviously, Kenya is not going to be kicked out of Somalia, contrary to euphoric views that are coming from political rhetoric in Mogadishu, because Kenya is not in Somalia as Kenya. It is there as part of the United Nations Security Council. In fact, Kenya's presence in the UN Security Council is going to safeguard that.
What about the sticky issue of that maritime dispute between us and Somalia?
That is true. Kenya now has an upper hand because it can smooth around with the big boys and continue to do what is happening, basically putting the case in ICC, I mean, International Criminal Court, within what you can call, in abeyance,
Right.
as we try to sort out the question of amicable discussion of that. Somalia has been hawkish about this. Tanzania and Mogadishu are discussing. Tanzania and Mozambique are discussing their common border.
Right.
South Africa and Mozambique are discussing their common border. South Africa and Namibia are discussing their common border. It's all over, but none of them is getting to the International Court of Justice. So I think Somalia overplayed this.
Right.
There is an innovation of the maritime trade between the countries of Eastern Africa across the Lake Victoria, and Kenya has renovated the sea lines in Lake Victoria from MV Uhuru. If you go to Kisumu, it's wonderful. The new Port Bell,
Right.
the station is now up and running, and a lot of goods are now moving from Kenya to Uganda by the rake, and that is now opening up trade. Now, continentally, Kenya is now moving to basically clinch its position on the continent. We have seen opening up of embassies with a very special mandate for what we call economic diplomacy. And most of the offices now embassies opened in Ghana, in many parts of West Africa, in Senegal, and so on, are all geared towards widening Kenya's economic footprint across the continent.
Honest on my checklist right now is now matters legal, international that is. And late last year, we got a letter from the AG, and you're speaking to the ICC, and they had asked for assistance as far as Paul Kishero, the lawyer, is concerned. And the AG said that, and this is a quote, it may not be, at this point in time, they may not be able to assist the court as contemplated. This coming off the back of a country that said it was going to strive to have multilateral cooperation once it gets into this Security Council seat. What happens now? Now that they have the seat, yet there's this issue in their backyard. They comply and assist.
The International Criminal Court is a very controversial institution. And the fact that the Americans have, particularly under President Trump, the relationship has been so strained, has undermined the ICC. Remember, Bensouda, the prosecutor, is a persona non grata in the United States. And she's increasingly going to be a persona non grata in many countries. ICC is a necessary instrument in global governance, but it is one that is a hostage of the nature of international relations that we have, which are based on the sovereignty of states. I think by empowering it, they undermine the sovereignty of Africa. And that itself became a contentious issue. Heads of states of the African continent are on record having said that ICC was contravening and even undermining the sovereignty of Africa. It was actually Africa's new Guantanamo Bay. I'm quoting a title of one of the books by African scholars. And therefore, it has a very, very bad reputation. On the continent, resistance to the ICC created regional courts, like, for example, the East African Court of Justice, and many other regional jurisdictions, in order to be in charge of our own destiny. So I don't think the Attorney General was on the wrong to have done what he did.
You don't think that position will change?
No. He was, and there was no contradiction between our support for multilateralism and the ICC. Remember, some elements of multilateralism are not essentially multilateralism. They are agents of global hegemony of certain powers. ICC, to all intents and purposes, was an instrument of European hegemony globally, and that's why it's failing. The Americans resisted it, Indians resisted it, Chinese resisted it, Russians resisted it. It's only the European Union, and it was the instrument of recolonization of the African continent, which has failed. So I have no tears for ICC.
Okay.
I'm sorry about it.
Even as you wind this up, I want to take your view when you look at the key indicators from where you stand in your study, what's your key indicator for 2021 as far as Kenya international affairs is concerned?
Oh, this, though this is the golden year for Kenya.
2021?
2021 is the golden year for Kenya because we are at the apex of the global leadership and governance. We are the only English-speaking part of Africa. The other two countries are, what you call francophone countries. So we are championing the interests of very many African countries on this continent, and we need really to put our best foot forward. I was part and parcel of the team that advised South Africa in, I think, 2008, and I think 2000. And I wrote quite a number of articles on that when South Africa went to the UN Security Council. So they put two powerful ambassadors with a huge experience in learning international affairs. That's why South Africa was so successful in many spheres in championing Pan-Africanism. Kenya has to be the champion of Pan-Africanism in 2021.
Right.
I have no doubt it will succeed, but it has to put its best foot forward.
Okay.
Currently, it is not.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's why we leave it as far as it's concerned, Professor Gugwanja. Thank you so much for your time. We'll do this same time, same place, 12 months from now. Okay.
Game.
Okay.
Deal.